The president froze mid-sentence on stage, and the White House called it exhaustion. But AOC wasn't buying it, and neither was the country. Phoenix was scorching that Friday. 36,000 people packed into Desert Mountain Stadium, waving flags and signs, chanting with the kind of fever that only shows up when Trump is in town. Vendors hawked T-shirts. Loudspeakers blasted YMCA. Chants of 4 more years echoed like clockwork. It felt like a party, until it didn't. He appeared from the right side of the stage as he always did. Red tie, navy suit, that same confident walk he'd perfected over decades, bald. The crowd erupted. Phones shot up. Trump gave his signature wave and a thumbs up. Then he stepped to the podium. "Thank you, Arizona," he shouted, but something was off. His voice cracked mid-sentence. A pause followed. He gripped the sides of the podium like he was grounding himself. The crowd, momentarily confused, offered another cheer to fill the gap. But he didn't go on. He opened his mouth again. No words came out. People in the front rows tilted their heads. A few leaned to each other. "Did the mic cut?" someone asked. Staffers near the steps exchanged glances. Trump cleared his throat. We're gonna," he stammered, then stopped. His jaw moved, but his words slid out like marbles from a bag. Disjointed, impossible to string together. Sweat formed at his temple. One hand clutched the podium harder now, knuckles whitening. Confusion grew. Some thought it was a joke. Others laughed nervously. A few started filming. The moment was too strange not to. 2 aides climbed up to him. The cameras tried to follow but were blocked by Secret Service. There was no official announcement. No music played, just silence and a heavy desert sky as he was led off the stage, one arm awkwardly draped around his body, almost like he'd forgotten how to walk naturally. "Is he okay?" a man in a camo hat asked nearby. No one answered. What was supposed to be a campaign highlight turned into pure confusion. People stood there waiting for someone, anyone, to explain what they had just witnessed. Some started to leave. Others stayed, staring at the empty podium like it might give them answers. Within the hour, hashtags began trending. Trump collapse. Speech gone wrong. Local news aired the footage again and again. On one loop, you could see the exact moment his eyes went blank, like the connection between thought and language just vanished. Medical experts on social media speculated everything from a stroke to a seizure to an advanced neurological disorder. By 10 p.m., his team released a short statement. The president experienced symptoms of routine exhaustion and is currently resting. No video, no follow-up, no clarification. Backstage, aides argued in whispers. Someone had already called a private air ambulance. One source later said Trump never regained full speech clarity that night. He kept asking the same question over and over. "Did I win already?" Only 2 people answered him, both pretending he was just tired. By morning, even Fox anchors were asking tough questions. Something had clearly gone wrong, and Americans were being fed pre-packaged lines. But without footage or further medical insight, speculation filled the airwaves. Still, nothing made the moment itself any less raw. The image of the most powerful man in the country, unable to form a sentence, caught in a freeze while the world watched, was burned into the minds of everyone who saw it live. One supporter in the crowd, a retired teacher from Yuma, told reporters, "I've seen him speak 4 times. This wasn't just tired. Something's wrong, and they know it." But while his base tried to make sense of the silence, someone else was already sharpening their voice. Saturday morning came with headlines wrapped in confusion. News vans lined the edges of Roosevelt Street outside the Phoenix Convention Center, even though the rally had ended nearly 14 hours ago. The official statement from the White House, just 23 words, sat on every news ticker like a placeholder for the truth. Routine exhaustion didn't sit right with anyone. Reporters called, texted, and knocked, but nobody from the administration would speak on record, not even off. Aides, who were usually quick with small talk on background, were suddenly avoiding eye contact in Capitol Hill corridors. Something wasn't just off, it was locked down. Cable news tried to fill the silence with theories. CNN brought on a neurologist from the University of Nevada Medical Center. He slowed down the footage frame by frame, pointing to facial tension, a lack of blinking, and a deep swallow. It could be aphasia, he said, but without a scan or report, it's all just educated guessing. Meanwhile, White House Press Secretary Jenna Alcott stood stiffly in front of reporters that afternoon for a 2-minute appearance. No Q&A, just a monotone statement. The president is resting comfortably. His schedule for the upcoming week remains unchanged. There is no cause for concern. Then she turned and left, ignoring shouted questions. But behind those polished sound bites, chaos was quietly unraveling. At the medical suite inside Marine One, flown in overnight to a secure location just outside Sedona, a team of specialists was flown in from Bethesda. A staffer later described the atmosphere as controlled panic. President Trump was awake, but his speech was slurred. He could answer yes or no questions with nods and gestures, but full sentences seemed just out of reach. Dr. Ruben Markell, a longtime neurologist for high-profile D.C. patients, was called in under a private contract. What he saw reportedly made him pause. "You're not dealing with fatigue," he allegedly told a top aide. "You're dealing with an event." Inside the residence, Melania was quiet. She sat near his bedside, eyes scanning a digital monitor but rarely speaking. Ivanka arrived within hours. Jared came too, but the inner circle had shrunk to a handful of faces, most of them now more afraid of the future than of leaks. And yet, no one said anything publicly. Not one photo, not one update. In Washington, the silence became a presence. Rumors moved through the halls like wind through tall grass. One staffer whispered that Trump had briefly forgotten his own name. Another claimed he mistook his son Barron for someone on his security detail. The more outrageous the rumors, the harder it became to separate panic from reality. And still, no proof, no footage, just the 90 seconds of chaos in Phoenix that everyone had already seen. But silence didn't just live in the White House. It echoed in the halls of Congress. No emergency briefings were scheduled. No updates were given to leaders outside the executive circle. Not even Speaker Renee Vaughn could get a straight answer. When she called Chief of Staff Tony Delore to request an update, he simply said, "He's stable. The president appreciates your concern." That was it, nothing more. Yet behind closed doors, the word amendment was beginning to make its way into conversations, quietly, carefully. The 25th meant for the unthinkable, a last resort. Outside, the country was waiting. Truckers in Albuquerque talked about the rally footage over black coffee and stale donuts. College students at Flagstaff's Northern Arizona University debated neurological disorders between political science classes. Some mocked, others were worried, but no one had answers. One of the biggest shows on radio, the Simon Dunham Hour, played the audio from the rally over and over. "Is that the voice of a tired man?" Simon asked his audience. "Or is that something else? And if it is, why are we the last to know?" Every second of the silence stretched the distance between the people and the truth. And the longer it went on, the more attention shifted to voices that weren't silent. Because while Trump's inner circle zipped its lips, one elected official in particular was watching from her apartment in Washington, D.C., phone in hand, live stream ready. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez had questions. And unlike everyone else, she wasn't about to keep them to herself. But she wasn't just asking questions. She was about to throw a match. The light on her phone flicked green. "Okay," Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez said to herself, brushing a strand of hair from her face. She wasn't in an office, wasn't behind a podium, just her small apartment in D.C., sitting cross-legged on the couch with a cup of peppermint tea growing cold on the table in front of her. "All right, y'all," she said, locking eyes with the screen. "Let's talk about what the entire country just saw yesterday." It wasn't planned. The live stream had started off with a few thousand viewers, mostly her core followers. But within 5 minutes, that number shot up, 10,000, then 20. By the time she reached her third sentence, CNN was already screen recording. She didn't waste time. "You're telling me the President of the United States couldn't speak, literally could not speak on stage, and we're calling that routine exhaustion?" Her voice was calm but tight. Each word sounded like it had been sharpened in her chest before coming out. "I don't care if you love him or can't stand him." That was serious, and we got silence. That's not leadership, that's avoidance. The comment section was moving too fast to read. Some were clapping back, others were egging her on, but she didn't pause. "I'm not a neurologist," she said, holding her palms out. "But you don't have to be to know something went very wrong in Phoenix. And pretending it didn't, that's not transparency, that's theater." At one point, she pulled her hair into a loose bun and leaned forward, eyes narrowing. If any of us started babbling on stage, forgetting basic words, unable to finish a sentence, you better believe someone would be talking about whether we're fit to serve. And yet here, we're supposed to sip our coffee and pretend it didn't happen? She took a sip of her own tea and winced. Cold. The video spread like wildfire. Within hours, it was clipped and remixed on every major social platform. Hashtags like #AOC Truth and #Presidential Health trended by nightfall. A 38-second clip of her saying, "We have a sitting president who can't speak in full sentences on stage, and we're just supposed to act like it's fine," was aired repeatedly on MSNBC, The View, and a dozen late-night shows. Her critics called it callous. Some said she was mocking a medical condition. Others accused her of trying to score points off another human being's suffering. Conservative commentator Blake Yates tweeted, "Imagine laughing at someone's health scare on camera and still pretending to be the voice of compassion." But AOC didn't backtrack. In fact, the next morning, she doubled down. Reporters caught her outside her apartment in Capitol Hill. "Do you regret how you phrased your live stream?" one asked. Without breaking stride, she said, "No, I regret that we still think silence equals strength." That quote hit just as hard. By Sunday, the administration was on defense. Jenna Alcott gave another short statement. "We find it deeply inappropriate that an elected official would mock the president during a moment of medical concern." When a reporter pressed her on whether Trump had undergone any evaluations, Alcott answered, "We have no additional information to share." It only added fuel. On a college radio show in Tempe, a student DJ played audio of Trump's Phoenix rally on loop next to clips of AOC's live stream. "What's more dangerous," she asked her listeners, "a leader who speaks poorly or one who stays silent while things fall apart?" In coffee shops from Santa Fe to Bakersfield, AOC's name was suddenly on everyone's lips. Whether people liked her or loathed her, they couldn't ignore her. She had said what many were afraid to, out loud and on camera. Inside the White House, the walls were closing in. Chief of Staff Tony Delore called a late-night strategy session. One advisor pacing the room reportedly asked, "Are we more afraid of the truth or of AOC?" But while the administration scrambled for control, the public's attention had already turned from confusion to confrontation. Sunday evening brought more than just football games and backyard cookouts. It brought tension, real, thick, nationwide tension that no one could quite describe. but everyone felt. A storm was building, and it wasn't coming from the sky. In a neighborhood bar just outside Bakersfield, two TVs hung side by side, one showing highlights of the Patriots game, the other playing news footage of Trump's Phoenix appearance on repeat. At one corner table, an older couple sat silently, rewatching the moment the president fumbled his words. "He looked scared," the woman said softly, her hand clutching a glass of sweet tea, like he didn't know where he was. Across the room, a man in his late 40s slammed his beer on the table. "He's fine," he said, loud enough for others to hear. "You people just want him gone so bad, you'll act like he's dying because he needed a nap." That was the mood, divided, sharp, personal. In Dayton, Ohio, a group of protesters stood outside the courthouse holding signs that read, "We deserve the truth," and "Fit to serve." Across the street, a counter-protest formed, waving MAGA flags and chanting, "4 more years." Arguments broke out. One man shoved another. A teenager filming on his phone was pushed to the ground. Police arrived but stayed hands off. Everyone was walking a line that felt thinner by the hour. Online, things were worse. Twitter was a war zone. Videos of AOC's live stream were now paired with edited clips of Trump over the years. His slower gait, his forgetfulness in interviews, the strange pauses that once seemed like quirks. "The signs were always there," someone tweeted. "Y'all just weren't watching." Right-wing influencers pushed back hard. Posts accusing AOC of exploiting a medical emergency flooded Instagram and TikTok. A few questioned whether her team had prepared the live stream in advance, as if waiting for a moment like this. A former aide to a Trump cabinet member wrote in a column, "It's no coincidence that Rep. Ocasio-Cortez went live within hours. This wasn't outrage, this was strategy." But outside the online trenches, average people were just confused and a little scared. In a town called Lubbock, Texas, a woman named Renata Wilkes watched the rally footage with her husband. Neither of them were overly political. They'd voted red for years, but not religiously. As the video played again, she leaned over and asked, "What if he's sick and they're hiding it?" Her husband didn't answer. In a high school classroom in Flagstaff, a government teacher named Mr. Morales opened Monday's class by projecting the footage on the whiteboard. "I want you all to watch this," he said to his students, "and tell me what you see. Not what you've read, what you see." Some kids laughed. Some looked concerned. A few said it made them uncomfortable, but no one said it looked normal. And still, the White House stayed quiet. The daily briefing was canceled without explanation. Vice President Charles Carriage made a short appearance at a trade summit in Colorado Springs, where he dodged every question about the president's health with the same smile and empty phrases. "The president is strong. The president is focused. The president is leading." Leading what, though? No one seemed to know. The silence made everything louder. Whispers grew into shouts. On Monday night, outside a shopping plaza in Fresno, two women got into a screaming match after one made a joke about Trump short-circuiting on stage. A video of the encounter went viral, not because of what was said, but because of the look in their eyes. Fear, frustration, exhaustion. Nobody was laughing anymore. Cable news hosts tried to keep things measured. But when one anchor asked, "What happens if the president can't speak publicly again?" the air felt thick. No one had a clear answer. Meanwhile, AOC stayed visible. She released a short video on her feed, not mocking this time, but pushing hard. "If the president is sick, then we deserve honesty. If he's well, then show us. But don't gaslight the country into thinking we didn't see what we all saw." The tone had shifted. Less fire, more steel. And her message hit a nerve. A flash poll released that same evening showed that 48% of Americans now doubted the White House's official statement about Trump's health. Even more shocking? Nearly 30% of Republican voters said they wanted clarity, even if it meant confronting something difficult. But while the public tried to hold on to reality, behind closed doors, something much bigger was already brewing. In the late hours of Monday night, deep inside a secure wing of the Verde Valley Medical Complex in Cottonwood, Arizona, the lights never dimmed. The hallway outside the president's private suite was quiet, except for the soft squeak of rubber soles and the occasional murmur of men in dark suits speaking into lapel mics. Inside the suite, 3 specialists from Walter Reed sat hunched over a table scattered with scans, charts, and clinical notes. The president's CT results had arrived hours earlier. No strokes, no bleeds. But something was clearly there, something they couldn't ignore. The neural activity patterns weren't normal for a man of 79. A cluster near the speech centers showed irregular signals. One doctor whispered what no one wanted to say: degenerative onset. Meanwhile, Trump slept under mild sedation. He'd been in and out all day, muttering fragments of old campaign slogans, sometimes not recognizing the nurse standing beside him. Only Melania and Ivanka had been allowed inside the room since noon. The White House communications team had been moved to a makeshift media bunker inside the facility's 3rd floor, where Tony Delore, the chief of staff, looked like a man aging by the hour. His tie hung loose, his phone battery was almost dead, but he kept talking, pacing, planning. "He cannot go on camera right now," Delore said flatly to his press team. "If anyone leaks a single frame of him in this state, they won't work in this town again." "What if this gets worse?" someone asked quietly. Delore didn't answer. He just stared at the locked door down the hall. Word had already begun circulating in tight circles on Capitol Hill. A handful of trusted allies had been briefed by phone under strict secrecy. Vice President Carriage received a red folder update that morning in Colorado Springs before boarding a flight back to D.C. But what rattled Delore the most wasn't what was happening inside the hospital. It was who was circling outside of it. He'd already received 2 calls from senior congressional Republicans asking, without asking, about leadership continuity. One of them, Senator Roscoe Delmar from Missouri, hadn't spoken to Delore directly in over a year. Now he was suddenly asking for daily health briefings. Even more troubling, a 3rd call came from a retired general in Florida known to be close with Trump. The message was short: "You need to get ahead of this, or someone else will." Back inside the suite, Ivanka sat with her arms crossed, her eyes tracing the lines of the heart monitor. "He asked me twice today if it was still 2020, she whispered to the doctor. And then he started mumbling about tariffs. The doctor said nothing. He didn't need to. That night, Delore called a meeting with 3 of the president's closest advisors, people who had been there through the wild ride of 2016, the messy re-election, and everything since. They met in a corner conference room, guarded by 2 Secret Service agents. "I need options," Delore said, shutting the door behind him. One aide, a media strategist named Erica Marsh, leaned forward. "Option 1, we give America a speech. Something short, scripted, maybe a pre-record. Have him read a statement, 30 seconds max, just enough to quiet people down." "Option 2?" Delore asked. "We say nothing and ride the noise until it burns out. Maybe use the hurricane on the East Coast to bury the coverage. News cycles shift. And if it doesn't burn out?" She paused. "Then we might be looking at a briefing with Carriage. Quiet, controlled, no official transfer of power, but we let people see there's stability." None of them mentioned the 25th Amendment. Not yet, but the air in that room told a different story. What they didn't know, what no one in that building knew, was that a White House aide named Colin Hatcher had recorded part of a conversation earlier that day between 2 doctors and a military liaison. He hadn't meant to. He had just walked by, paused, and hit record on instinct. Later that night, in a hotel room off Highway 89A, Colin played the clip again. One voice on the recording said clearly, "He may never return to full executive function. We need to prepare." Colin didn't sleep that night. He didn't know who to send it to, but he knew one thing: someone outside that hospital needed to hear it. But before the clip ever saw the light of day, A new wave of chaos was about to hit, with Trump's closest allies starting to turn on each other. Tuesday morning cracked open with a silence that didn't feel like peace. It felt like people holding their breath. By 7 a.m., 3 major news outlets reported the president was still under routine medical observation, but none could confirm who had actually seen him in the last 24 hours. Still no photo, still no voice. Inside the West Wing, the pressure was unbearable. Greg Halden, one of Trump's longest-serving advisors, part campaign strategist, part shadow operator, stood at the edge of the Oval Office. Not inside, not invited. For the first time in nearly 7 years, the president hadn't returned a single one of his calls. Halden wasn't the only one being shut out, but it stung. They'd shared a war room through 2 elections. Now he was getting briefed by staffers half his age who used phrases like optics management. He'd had enough. Halden had always kept a journal, digital voice memos mostly, half strategy notes, half personal thoughts. But that morning, he opened a fresh file on his laptop and hit record. The president's health is worse than they're saying. There are people inside who know this, and no one is speaking. I'm putting this down because someone has to. He paused, stared at the cursor blinking on his screen, then added, I'm not sure who I'm loyal to anymore. It wasn't just Halden. All around D.C., people who once bragged about their closeness to the president were now avoiding eye contact in elevators. Texts went unanswered. Lunches were canceled. You could feel the machinery grinding to a halt. The insiders weren't working the story. They were running from it. At 10:42 a.m., an anonymous email landed in the inbox of a senior political editor at the Detroit Ledger. It contained a transcript, 3 paragraphs, private medical notes allegedly dictated by one of the specialists treating Trump. One line stood out. Expressive language impairment has persisted for 36 hours. Cognitive evaluation limited due to low responsiveness to verbal stimuli. The editor paused before forwarding it to their legal team. That afternoon, a mid-level aide named Brianna Colton sat down for an off-the-record coffee with a journalist friend in Georgetown. She didn't say much, but the look on her face said more than her words. It's worse than they're telling you. Inside the White House, some aides clung to the idea of business as usual. Morning meetings still happened, briefing folders still passed hands, but none of it felt real. No new directives came from the top. No tweets, no phone calls. The president's absence had turned into a presence of its own. Then came the leak. At 3:12 p.m., a low-res audio clip was posted anonymously on a decentralized file sharing site. By 3:30, it had been downloaded over 50,000 times and was trending on Reddit. In the clip, a man's voice, low, tired, asks, "Did I win already?" Another voice answers calmly, "Yes, sir, you're in your 2nd term." The man responds, "Then why are we still doing this?" You could hear the hum of machines in the background. Footsteps, a monitor beep. The internet lost its mind. Some said it was fake. Others broke down the sound quality and timing, pointing out how the clip matched the hospital's audio environment. Fact checkers couldn't confirm it, nor could they deny it. In the communications room, Delor slammed the table so hard a water bottle flipped. Find out who the hell recorded that and shut it down. But it was too late. The leak had changed everything. It wasn't just about what was said, it was about what was felt. The voice didn't sound like a man in control. It sounded like someone lost. For the first time since Phoenix, the phrase transfer of power was spoken aloud in a cabinet meeting. That night, Halden received a call from an unlisted number. The voice on the other end was someone he hadn't spoken to in years, someone from the inner ranks of the first campaign. "They're going to try to clean house," the voice said. "I'm not talking staff, I mean legal, medical, digital, everything. They want this buried, hard." Halden didn't ask how they knew. He just asked one question. "Is there time?" The line went quiet for a moment. Then, not much. But while the inner circle fractured in silence, AOC was preparing to speak again. And this time, Her words would leave no room for misinterpretation. By Wednesday morning, the pressure cooker had blown its lid. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez stood in the heart of Tempe, Arizona, surrounded by hundreds of college students packed into the courtyard at Arizona State. No suit, no podium, just a microphone, rolled up sleeves, and a restless energy that mirrored the crowd. She wasn't here to explain herself. She was here to double down. "I'm sorry," she said into the mic, her voice rising above the murmurs. "But we can't pretend this is normal. We can't keep calling serious medical breakdowns just a bad day. If this happened to your father, your boss, your neighbor, you'd be asking real questions." The crowd cheered. Then she did something no one expected. She dropped the mic to her side and, mimicking Trump's body language from the Phoenix rally, walked stiffly toward the front of the stage. Eyes glassy, lips slightly parted, she paused and whispered, We're gonna," just as he had. Gasps erupted. Some laughed. Others didn't know what to feel. Then she stopped, dead center, and held up the mic again. Now imagine if that were me. Imagine the headlines. Imagine the outrage. Why are we pretending this is okay just because it's him? Cameras captured every second. The video hit the internet in waves. Within 30 minutes, it was on Twitter, TikTok, YouTube, and every major cable outlet. Some labeled it brave, others called it cruel. Hashtags trended on both sides. #mockery or truth and #AOC gone too far. It wasn't just online chatter now, it was a full-blown cultural moment. Conservative anchors on radio stations from Wichita to Spokane called it one of the most disrespectful displays by an elected official in recent memory. One even claimed she should be censured. In a grocery store in Sioux Falls, a retired veteran named Del Hartley turned to his wife and said, "You don't kick a man when he's down." She didn't disagree, but she also didn't look away from the screen. Even some of her own supporters cringed. In a Brooklyn coffee shop, a pair of campaign volunteers watched the clip with a mixture of pride and nervous laughter. "She's not wrong," one muttered, "but damn, that was a choice." But to AOC, the reaction wasn't the point. Later that day, during a radio interview in Tucson, she addressed the backlash. "I'm not mocking a condition," she said firmly. "I'm mocking a cover-up. There's a difference. And if people can't see that, maybe we've grown too used to being lied to." She paused, let that sink in, then added, "If truth looks ugly, don't blame the mirror." That line lit the match again, but with heat came risk. That evening, her chief of staff received a hand-delivered letter at their D.C. office. No return address, no signature, just a single page inside. "You've poked too hard. There are eyes on you now." They didn't tell AOC immediately, but she knew something had shifted. At home that night, she scrolled through messages from strangers. Most were supportive, a few were vile. One read, "Careful what you ask for, you might get it." She tossed her phone onto the couch, pulled her knees to her chest, and sat in silence. Across the country, a man in a dark SUV parked outside a small media firm in Kansas City. Inside that firm were two editors quietly working on a story based on leaked medical records they hadn't yet published. The man didn't enter. He just watched, waited, made a call. "You sure they have it?" the voice asked on the other end. "Positive," he replied. "Just waiting on your word." But while shadows were moving quietly behind the scenes, AOC was about to find out her voice had reached someone unexpected, someone closer to Trump than anyone imagined. By Thursday morning, AOC's office felt like a bunker. Staffers moved carefully, heads down, speaking in clipped whispers. Security had quietly increased the night before, adding a second plainclothes officer to monitor her building. No official threats had been confirmed, just a few strange emails, a couple of unfamiliar faces lingering outside, but the tension was enough. Alexandria didn't flinch in public. She kept walking, kept speaking, kept doing interviews. But behind her locked office door, she stared at the letter that had arrived without a name. "You've poked too hard. There are eyes on you now. She had read it 5 times that morning already. Still, she wasn't backing down. Midday, she sat down to record a response video. Not a live stream this time, no off-the-cuff lines, just her speaking directly to camera with deliberate clarity. "If there are eyes on me, good," she said. "Maybe they'll finally look where they're supposed to, at the truth." She talked about transparency, about accountability, about the weight of power, and the danger of pretending all was well when it wasn't. She didn't mention Trump's name once, but everyone knew who she meant. Then she said something new. "I've received messages. Some are warnings, some are threats. That's fine. I signed up for this. But if something happens to me, or my team, or anyone speaking the truth, remember this moment, because silence isn't strength, it's complicity." She uploaded the video. Within 2 hours, it had over 8 million views. But as her words spread across phones and screens, someone else was watching from the inside. Inside the White House residence, a man sat alone in the East study room. Mid-50s, glasses, sharp posture. His name was Ronald Wexler, Deputy National Security Advisor. Not a public face, not a media figure, just a lifer in the corridors of executive power. He had been with 3 administrations, knew how to read between silences, and what he saw over the last few days chilled him more than any foreign threat ever had. Wexler had been in the Verde Valley suite on Tuesday. He'd heard the president mumble nonsense, watched him drift in and out like someone caught in a dream. What stuck with him most was the blankness behind Trump's eyes, like whatever fire had once driven him was flickering, nearly out. Now Wexler sat staring at AOC's video, re-watching the last 60 seconds again and again. He closed the laptop, folded his hands, and made a decision. 3 hours later, a white envelope arrived at AOC's Capitol Hill office marked "Confidential for Representative Ocasio-Cortez." No postage, no fingerprints. Inside was a single-page letter typed in clean font. No signature. "I have seen what they are hiding. I do not agree with what's being done to you. You were right to speak. Be careful. There are people preparing to remove him, not with process, but with pressure. He is more vulnerable than the country knows." She read it twice, then looked up at her team. "Who delivered this?" she asked. No one knew. For the first time in days, she went quiet. Meanwhile, inside a suite at a boutique hotel in Sedona, Colin Hatcher, the aide who'd recorded the medical discussion, sat with a burner phone on his lap and a USB drive on the desk. He'd been contacted by a reporter from the Sentinel who offered to fly out and verify the recording, face-to-face, no names mentioned. But now Colin wasn't sure. He'd seen the way things were shifting, how people were going quiet, how powerful hands were moving without leaving fingerprints. He picked up the burner phone, dialed the number on the scrap of paper the reporter had sent. "Hello? Change of plan," Colin said. "I want to talk to someone who can protect me." The voice on the other end didn't hesitate. "Then you're not looking for a reporter." Colin hung up. He didn't know what his next step would be, but he knew the walls were getting closer, and someone needed to be brave enough to push back. But before anyone could make their next move, the president was scheduled to return, live and on camera, for a town hall in Tulsa, and not everyone believed it would really be him. The town of Tulsa hadn't seen this many press vans parked in one place since the last major campaign. Local officers blocked off entire streets near the convention center, and drones hovered overhead, tracking the crowd from a distance. The president was scheduled to speak live at 7:00 p.m. local time, or so they said. No one had seen him in public since the Phoenix rally. No impromptu photos, no leaked footage from behind closed doors. Just silence, statements, and a growing stack of conspiracy theories. But tonight, the silence would finally be broken, or replaced with something far stranger. Inside the backstage green room, the team moved like clockwork. Lights adjusted, angles tested, every second scripted. Jenna Alcott stood near the curtain, lips tight, holding a blue folder marked with a black sticker. Sked, POTUS remarks, verb. "Is he ready?" she asked without turning around. "He's as ready as he's going to be," a staffer replied. 7:00 p.m. arrived. The band played its final note. The crowd stood. Cheers erupted as the announcement rang out. "Ladies and gentlemen, the President of the United States." He walked out slowly, almost methodically, still in his usual suit, still with that familiar wave, but something wasn't right. The crowd couldn't name it, but they felt it. He stopped at the podium, adjusted the mic, and began to speak. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for being here." Each word sounded like it had been dug up from the back of his throat. Pauses fell in places they didn't belong. Intonations missed their marks. His voice wasn't raspy, it was distant, mechanical, almost rehearsed. Some people clapped, some just stared. He continued, "Our country is strong. We are stronger than ever before." His eyes stayed fixed on the teleprompter. He never looked away, not once. One cameraman glanced toward the control booth. "Something's off," he muttered. "This doesn't sound like him." At home, viewers turned up the volume. A woman in Fort Smith, Arkansas, leaned closer to the TV and whispered to her husband, "He sounds weird, like slowed down or dubbed." Online comments exploded. "Is this even live? His voice sounds auto-tuned. Deepfake? AI? What are we watching right now?" By the time he reached the halfway point, "Together, we will continue to win," the suspicion had gone from fringe to mainstream. A viral post on X claimed the president's voice was being fed through a speech synthesizer, AI-assisted language generation, using pre-recorded cadences stitched into a real-time vocal feed. Experts weighed in within minutes. Some called it ridiculous. Others weren't so sure. Voice pattern analysts on YouTube paused the speech frame by frame, comparing it to footage from last year. "The facial movements aren't syncing to the syllables," one said. "This isn't exhaustion. This is substitution." Back at the venue, Jenna Alcott stepped away from the curtain, pressing her earpiece. "I told you this would raise more questions than answers," she whispered. "But at least he spoke," the voice replied. "Did he?" The speech wrapped up at 7:24 p.m. He waved again, short, robotic, and walked off stage without stopping to shake a single hand. The music played. The crowd half cheered, half watched in disbelief. One man near the front turned to his wife and said, "He's not better. They're just pretending he is." The next morning, the Sentinel published a piece titled, "The President Spoke, but Was It Really Him?" The article wasn't accusing. It wasn't conspiratorial. It simply laid out facts. Missing inflections, abnormal pacing, uncanny delivery. Hours later, AOC posted a clip of the speech with a caption, "This isn't leadership. This is puppetry. And America deserves better than a voice on a string." Her words hit even harder this time, because now people weren't just hearing it. They were seeing it. Even longtime supporters started asking, if he's okay, why does he sound like that? And if he's not, who's really running things? A flash poll showed public trust in the president's communication had dropped by 22% overnight. Even inside his own party, murmurs of concern became full-blown phone calls. And somewhere in a quiet hotel room in Topeka, Colin Hatcher watched the speech 3 times. On the third pass, he opened a new email draft. He typed a single sentence. "You wanted proof? Compare this to March 22. That's not the same man." He hit send, not to a reporter this time, but to the only person who seemed willing to ask what others wouldn't. But as pressure mounted across both parties, AOC prepared for the final blow. The one speech no one could ignore and no one could silence. Friday evening, just after 8 p.m., the Capitol steps were lit brighter than usual. Not for ceremony, not for a vote, but for a speech. AOC stood at a small podium. No teleprompter, no flag backdrop, just a crowd of reporters, supporters, and staff. The sun had dipped low behind the buildings. The wind picked up. Phones were already raised, ready to stream every word. She began without fanfare. "Let me be clear," she said, her voice steady. "This isn't about politics anymore. It's not about left or right. It's not even about this moment. It's about trust." She looked out over the crowd, people packed into the plaza and spilling onto the lawn. We watched the president struggle to speak in Phoenix. We watched a rushed cover story try to mask it. Then we watched a so-called return speech that sounded like it was stitched together in a lab. The crowd was dead silent. "And through all of it," she continued, "we got the same answer. Don't ask, just believe." She stepped away from the podium briefly and looked up at the sky, then back at the faces below. "I'm 35 years old. I've been called dramatic. I've been called divisive. But what I've never been accused of is pretending not to see the obvious." A reporter shouted from the edge, "Are you calling for the president to step down?" She paused. "I'm calling for transparency. I'm calling for honesty. And if that means stepping down, then that's between the president and the American people." Gasps followed. So did applause. Across the country, people tuned in. In living rooms from Cheyenne to San Antonio, families paused dinner to listen. Retired workers in Indianapolis turned up their radios. Soldiers stationed in Okinawa pulled it up on base Wi-Fi. She wasn't screaming, she wasn't mocking, she was cutting straight through the fog. "Power doesn't make someone untouchable," she said. "It makes them accountable." She laid out everything the public hadn't been told. The silence, the delays, the suspicious AI-generated voice theory, the whistleblowers who had gone quiet, the aides who hadn't returned to work. She didn't give names, but she didn't need to. "This isn't theater," she said. "It's governance. And if we start allowing illusions to replace reality, then we're not a democracy anymore. We're a show." Someone clapped, then another, then a wave of applause rolled through the crowd. But she wasn't done. "I'm not afraid of threats. I'm not afraid of losing my job. What I'm afraid of is a country that forgets how to demand the truth. Because once that's gone, it doesn't come back." From inside the White House, a staffer watched the live stream on mute, lips tight. In another building, Vice President Carriage sat in a conference room with 3 senior advisors. The expression on his face said what no one dared say aloud. This speech would leave a mark. Meanwhile, in a retirement home in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, an 82-year-old former Navy mechanic who voted for Trump twice said to his nurse, "She's right. We deserve to know." Even Fox News, which had been cautious in its coverage, aired the entire speech live. No interruptions. The moment had become bigger than partisanship. As AOC wrapped up, she stood still for a moment as if weighing what to say next. Then softly, "This isn't about me. And it's not even about him anymore. It's about all of us. We have the right to ask, and we have the right to expect answers." She stepped down from the podium. No grand exit, no waving, just quiet. The next morning, her office received a small, unmarked envelope. Inside was a single sentence handwritten on thick cream paper. Sometimes it takes someone outside the circle to remind the rest how dangerous silence can be. No name, no return address, but she smiled when she read it. Across the nation, conversations shifted. Supporters of the president began to ask for medical verification, not because they wanted to discredit him, but because they cared. Lawmakers on both sides started calling for a closed-door session on executive fitness. One Republican from Nebraska publicly said, "The country deserves confidence in its leadership. That's not disloyalty, that's patriotism." And while nothing happened overnight, no formal resignation, no 25th invocation, something else occurred. The grip broke. The fear of asking questions, of confronting what people saw with their own eyes. It cracked open. People didn't want illusion anymore. They wanted honesty, and that was the real reckoning. If this story moved you, If you believe truth should never be optional, don't scroll away. Share this. Subscribe. Stay loud, because silence serves no one.